Good evening, everyone. It is Wednesday, July 8th, 2020, and welcome to another episode of Unfinished Business. I am Rogette Harris, and this week's conversation is with Dr. Nina Ahmed, Democratic nominee for Pennsylvania Auditor General. She tells us why she is best to lead the Auditor General's office. She won a six-way primary race, and if elected on November 3rd, Dr. Ahmed will be the first person of color to hold a statewide row office in Pennsylvania. It is about time that glass ceiling is broken. I myself am the first person of color elected chairperson of the Democratic Party in Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, and I am currently the only Black chairperson in the entire state of Pennsylvania. That's 1 out of 67 counties. Diversity and inclusion are two very different issues. And having a seat at the table is good, but people of color also need to be able to set the agenda. The only way to set the agenda is for more women and racial minorities to get elected, and that is what Dr. Ahmed plans to do on November 3rd. Please subscribe to watch our weekly show on YouTube at Rogette Harris. Also, feel free to send a comment, show idea, or just say hi to unfinishedbusiness@rogette.com. Let's get busy and solve some unfinished business. Hello, everyone. We are back with Dr. Nina Ahmed, who is the Democratic nominee for Pennsylvania Auditor General. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So what made you run for Auditor General?
So I have decided after I was deputy mayor for the city of Philadelphia that I needed to be in a place that had more impact. Being a deputy mayor in the large city, the work I was doing was incremental, and looking at the disparities that we have, not just in our state but in our country, I wanted to be in a role where I could make a difference in leveling those playing fields. And the Auditor General's office is an independent office, only answerable to Pennsylvanians, the residents of Pennsylvania, the taxpayers of Pennsylvania. And I felt that having that level of accountability and having an independent voice to uplift and focus on issues that could make a change in the most marginalized communities, this was a good platform to do that.
So you brought up that you were a deputy mayor in the past. What in your background and other experience makes you feel you are qualified to hold this office? Why should voters vote for you?
So just to preface that before I talk about myself, this office is a leadership job. It is about creating a direction for the office. We have a lot of professional staff who are CPAs and who actually design the audits and know all the principles to follow, as well as direct the auditors who go out in the field. However, the leadership position of being an Auditor General is to be able to understand and manage all of that, as well as create direction and be part of the strategic team that is propelling Pennsylvania forward, along with the governor, the attorney general, the treasurer, and the legislature. So my background I bring a lot of broad experiences to this job. So as a small business owner, my husband and I had a business for over 26 years, and we had to operate in an audit and financial environment at all times. When you want to make payroll, that's when you understand what constituents feel on the other end. And of course, having audits of your business on an annual basis. I also served, as you said, as a deputy mayor, which really gave me a window into the fact that the budget is a moral document. And how we decide what the priorities are. And then actually following the trail to see, we set a budget, we made priorities. Are those monies actually being used for those priorities? How effective we are. And that actually was what an Auditor General can do much better to follow the money and see the use of the money. And I also served for 9 years on the board of the Philadelphia Foundation. That's 3 terms, the maximum. And in that capacity, I was a grant-making chair where we were responsible for putting out the $40 million into the local nonprofits there for service to the communities that we served. So we had full responsibility of saying how was the money allocated, who was it going to, what metrics were we using, and we had oversight over that while the staff did the actual work. And I also served on the investment committee, which was to safeguard the over $500 million endowment and make sure we made responsible choices, because the Philadelphia Foundation has a lot of donor advice funds that make up the entire amount, along with some larger accounts there. So we had to make sure that we were doing that for the discretionary and the non-discretionary money, that we were making responsible choices to grow it. And I was a great proponent about seeing how socially responsible were the investments where they were going. We were shifting into that kind of an environment. So, and then finally, I served as the president of the local chapter of the National Organization for Women, and now I'm on the national board, where we are the fiduciary. We have the responsibility to safeguard the monies that the membership pays in order to do the work of the organization, not only just the money part, but also matching the money to the goals. That has always been something I've been very interested in, and the Auditor General's office is all about not just following the money, but actually the performance of the money. So I feel that with all of this, I'm well prepared to take the helm of this job, but this is always about working with people, making sure, when we are looking at how audits are done, the accounting principles that are used, we need to make sure we use new kinds of lens on some of the work we do. And I want to sit with our CPAs to see, how do we do those things? How do we have racial equity built into our audits? How do we have gender equity built into our audits? How are we measuring those things, and how are we giving the report card to the people? So I'm excited to use that office and all the data that it generates to really serve Pennsylvania.
Sounds like you have a lot of experience managing large budgets and staff. As you know, here in Pennsylvania, the Republican-led legislature has made a lot of budget cuts year after year for the Auditor General's office. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of staff cuts. So the office is expected to do more and more audits with less and less staff. Do you have any, how do you plan on managing that?
So one of the things is to be an office that is a resource to our legislature. One of the things that I want to show is all of the legislature that is passed, that is crafted, needs data, and we would be one of those sources that could give you really good data. For example, about pharmacy benefits managers that we are very focused on in looking at as we look to reduce the price of prescription drugs. Now, this is the data we would collect and we would be able to share so that the legislature that is passed actually helps our independent pharmacies and ultimately the customers, the patients who are getting those resources, the drugs. But we can't do that. And this is our first-hand primary data that we would be generating. No better primary data than coming right from the state, other than looking at other people's best practices. So if we don't have communication with our legislature to say, what exactly are we doing for you? And in this process of running for the primary, I've been talking to a legislator in the Philadelphia area and some in other places as well. And the refrain I have heard is that we know the Auditor General's office does a lot of good work. We see all the recommendations, but we need to have a more integrated approach so we can use those recommendations and then help them stick. So I think if we can make a case for ourselves that we are a resource to both branches of government, then we can see about budgets being improved and making sure that, and the other piece is actually advocating for our workers, is to say the workload is so much more on people than it used to be, because we're still doing those 5,000 mandated audits. And that's not fair. And also making the case that what does each worker bring to the table that improves lives of Pennsylvanians, and drawing that bright line and saying, if you're seeing that we're doing the work, then people need to have a good working condition, good pay, and they have to be able to have a workload they can actually deal with. Because what's happening now, those audits are getting falling behind, and the audit is of not much use if you're coming so far behind when the actual problem happened.
Right.
Because these are after the fact. So you need to be very prompt and quick about sharing those results. And we can't do that because we just don't have the capacity. So I think we make that point that if you want your money well used, make sure you have a well-staffed organization.
Now, as you know, the current Auditor General, Eugene D. Pasquale, has really expanded the office and thought outside the box.
Yes.
Do you have any new ideas, or what are your first priorities?
First of all, I am so pleased he has done so because he has really made the office an effective tool for accountability and transparency. I am deeply grateful to him. I want to carry out that and build on that legacy. One of the things that I'm really interested in is to have a pandemic preparedness audit. Given what we've been having in the last few months, and seeing that the federal government really has failed us. When this current administration came in, immediately the pandemic unit in the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, was disbanded, because we've had other pandemics before. I mean, they didn't come to the height of a pandemic because we had a unit that was dealing efficiently and effectively to make sure you and I didn't feel the pinch of that. And we didn't have anything shut down. We didn't have, none of this happened, but it could have happened. So we know that we know how to do this. It's just of having the will. And I would like us as a state to have that capacity, regardless of what the federal government may or may not do. We need to have efficiency and preparedness within our state so that our state doesn't suffer the way it has in the past few months.
Like you brought up the pandemic that we're dealing with now with the coronavirus. As you know, there are some people who still haven't received, example, the unemployment checks, the first check. As far as businesses, for some reason, larger corporations received help versus the mom and pop businesses. Is that something that the Auditor General's office could audit and or help find out where the problem occurred so that doesn't happen again?
Absolutely. So this is a culture, business culture. When you have a big organization, big corporation, you have good relationships with the banks. Your bank officers serve you as they should serve every customer. And part of this information flow has gone to the top immediately. And we need to make sure, how is the state connecting and communicating with our smallest nonprofit or our smallest business? Because at the end of the day, it's our small businesses that drive the economy much more. And the money is circulated from a small business much faster than a bigger corporation. So it behooves us to make sure we are looking at the drivers of our economy and making sure that they're getting the services they need or the resources they need. And in that pandemic preparedness that I talked about audit, I would have not just a health component, it would have an economic component. Audit would have all those components in it, which would include an economic component. And these are the questions we would ask to say, how do you prepare disbursement of resources under such conditions?
Okay. Now, as you know, your nomination has a historical ring to it. You are the first woman of color nominated on the Democrat Party for a row office position. There are 5 or 6 of you in the primary election. If I remember correctly, the state Democrat Party did not endorse anyone. So
Correct.
you were pretty much on your own in that sense. And having to campaign during the pandemic, what are some obstacles as a woman of color do you feel you had to overcome to win this nomination?
So one is that I don't have the deep bench of established relationships with organized or spaces. So, for example, people had to get to know me as sort of an independent kind of candidate to understand and build trust. At the end of the day, every relationship is about trust, about saying these are her values, these are my values, this is where we intersect. I can get behind someone like that. So when you don't have a long-standing relationship, you have to do that during a campaign. So that was something I had to do. Being a brown immigrant, people don't know that they understand where you're coming from. So it was on me to make that happen, to say, here, these are the places where we have a lot of similarities, and these are the differences which are valuable that we bring to the table. I look at differences between people as being powerful, and how do we connect on using that power and building on that. So yes, so that created, I don't have a name like, a legacy name that I can depend on to say people already, when you have a name, it conjures up something to people before you even speak. So what was happening before I spoke was like, who's this and who is she and where is she from and what is her background and how would she understand my issues? So that was a barrier I had to, and I continue to have to, sort of overcome. And that comes from being authentic. That says what I'm saying to Rogette Harris is no different what I'll be saying to the governor, or I'll be saying to the grandmother on the porch on the corner of my block. All will be the same conversation. So you can trust that I am not being expedient and saying one thing here and another thing there. And I think I was able to show people that is true. And because we were in a pandemic and people like you actually helped in that, you did a lot of recorded interviews that were put on platforms that people had the time to actually go and look at. The one problem with this whole scenario is there's a digital divide and not everybody has access to Chrome and have a laptop, right? So, and even if you had equipment, you might not have been able to pay the $60 to get your connection to the internet. So those are the things that we have to worry about, not just during a pandemic, but always. But the pandemic kind of showed that, particularly in the space of education. So I was cognizant of that. Much of my conversation with communities were also through phones. Most people have some level of some type of a phone with, and usually everybody has a cell phone these days. Might not have a lot of capability, but you can at least talk on the phone. So I made sure that while we were zooming along, there was also other ways to reach people, including just talking to people directly.
Outside of the Democratic Party, what about other organizations, women's groups, other groups, even unions? Did you get support from other organizations during your race?
So this, I think of all our 6 candidates, I had the broadest coalition of support. I had organized labor. I had women's groups across the state. I had progressive groups across the state and locally as well. I had students involved in this. I had immigrant groups who were looking to have for a first time an immigrant in a position, in a statewide position, that would look to not only do a narrative change, because we are hearing some ugly things from the White House about immigrants, about people of color, and it's really critical that we as Democrats show that we don't only have rhetoric, we match our rhetoric with our bench, right? And I think this is it's not just me, it is what I stand for that I think is important for our state and for our country, to show that people can actually get behind someone like me and trust me and make sure that I perform, but they vet me and then I'm there. just because of the color of my skin or because I'm an immigrant, I'm not been thrown away, right? So I think we really need to have that being messaged very clearly.
I find when I talk to certain groups of color that a lot don't get involved in the political process because they feel as though they're not heard.
Yeah.
Or they feel as though candidates or politicians just come around during election time and then they disappear and don't really put forth or at least try to implement policies that address their needs or wants. Is this something that you find? Do you think the Democrat Party here in Pennsylvania are trying to address those issues? Regardless, if you're elected, what can you do to try to make sure that everyone is included?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more that that is what a lot of people feel and think. This is, again, my experience of having a track record on making sure I reach out to people. So I used to be on the board of the Pennsylvania Immigration and Citizenship Coalition, where it was a broad umbrella across the state. I've served on President Obama's, I was very fortunate to be appointed to his Commission for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, where we had an up-close seat with the federal government and connected community to that. And then locally for Mayor Nutter, I used to be the chair of the local Asian American Affairs Commission. So as a result of that, I have worked with a long time with people to make sure their needs are met. And when I was the president of the Philadelphia Now and currently as a board member, that's an intersection I keep going. That, you particularly when you intersect women of color, and marginalized communities, you come up with an immigrant woman who really is not being heard in any space. And so I'm very cognizant of that. And having people in positions like an Auditor General really impacts communities. And I'll give you a quick example. Which Auditor General would ever make it their business to look at maternal mortality? It hasn't been an issue yet in the state, right?
Right.
Out of the general level. That's going to be one of my driving issues. I'm very interested in that. I've already done work in that. I've written about it. I've worked with legislators on that already. The bill that's on the floor, actually, I was involved in giving information around that. So it makes a difference to have representation. When I was, I have a long history. When I was deputy mayor, we worked on issues that would improve women who came to City Hall to make sure we had changing tables. We worked with the Women's Commission, which actually was housed within my department. We had an Office of Engagement for Women, and we set up the first Women's Commission that was mandated through our charter change. Voters elected us to do that. And one of the things we worked on was having changing tables for fathers in the restrooms inside City Hall, where especially when they came for the judicial hearings, our bathrooms were not equipped for those things. Making sure there were lactation spaces where women could, get their breast milk for their children or feed their children. So all of these things come because of lived experiences you bring to the table. And in order for equity, for women to have equity in the workplace, you have to have these resources. This is what our biology is. We didn't choose this one way or the other. In order for us to be productive employees or productive economic units, we need to make sure our workplaces reflect that. So that's something that I would audit to see how our departments, making sure the department is set up for everyone, not just one gender. So those are kinds of things that I care about.
And you kind of hold two hats. It's interesting when you're a woman of color. Sometimes it's like you're one or the other when you're both.
Yeah.
But I do know if elected, you'll actually be the first person of color to hold a row office. Correct. I do know that Tim Reese was appointed, but as you know, being appointed and being elected are two different things.
Correct.
Would you also be the first woman elected to Auditor General's office?
No, we've had women before. We had Barbara Hafer.
Okay.
And there was another woman. I think there was a total of two women possibly
Okay.
before me. There was another Democratic woman. Both have been. One, Barbara Hayford was a Republican, and there was a
Republican.
Democrat much earlier in the 60s. There was someone, but
Okay.
not for very long, from what I understand. There's very little information about her. I can't seem to find. I have to get into the archives to find out information about her.
Okay. Um,
And they were
what
white
are,
people, basically.
right, right. What are ways to, recruit and encourage other women of color to run for office? As you know, there aren't a lot of, especially here in Pennsylvania, you don't have a lot of people to look to and say, oh, I can do that. I can do that as well.
Yeah,
So it's nice to have that image of someone that looks like you
yeah.
in a position. But
Absolutely. I mean, I want to, so I'll be very busy, not only being Auditor General, but actually sharing my experiences and making them meaningful for someone else. Now, not everybody runs for office, I get that, but even if you're not running for office, how to make headway in spaces that have been pretty much the, white men in general. They've held their, own in certain spaces. And to break into those spaces, you need to have a certain kind of um, makeup, mental makeup to get there. And I think those are things that I can sit and have these conversations with people, whether it's in the corporate world, whether it's in the political sphere, or whether it's just in government. Uh, we need to be able to sit and have these honest conversations and assess ourselves. A self-assessment and knowing where my strength is and where my weakness is, and what do I need to bolster and what do I need to hone more in order to enter the space that I want comfortably with confidence, is something I really want to be useful to other women and other people, not just women. There are communities who are very marginalized that have multiple identities, and I want to be able to at least speak to some of those identities to say, this is how you can navigate certain spaces. I've been had to do this pretty much all my life. When I was a biomedical scientist, I worked at Wills Eye Hospital. That was primarily white men. It was a lot of physicians and white men. And when I was in the chemistry department getting my Ph.D. at Penn, that was the preserve of white men as well. So, I mean, there were other people here and there, but at the end of the day, working with everybody was very important, particularly with the power group, to get a piece of that power is something I really want to share with other people.
Well, what do you think of the current political climate? A lot of people are fed up with the way things are and they do want to change. Do you think that will help the Democratic Party, at least here in Pennsylvania?
I definitely think so. I think we've had this last almost 4 years have been so chaotic for our country. We've had one debacle after the other. And that is partly not just, a president is not, doesn't do that much. They're a leadership job. It's who they appoint in these other places that becomes really important. So we need, competent people in places like the EPA, FDA, CDC, you name it, any one of these agencies that serve you and me have been depleted. Their positions have not been filled. And if they have been filled, they've been filled with people who have no competence in those areas. So we, right away, I think, if we get President Biden, he already brings a team of people because he was part of an administration that actually made some headway in accountability and transparency. And he will bring a whole suite of people who will be able to address and calm our fears of, will I have clean water? Will my children get their vaccinations? These are things that have a lot of starts at the federal government level. A lot of the resources coming through affordable housing, you name it. That's my dog making a weird sound. Oscar. He's sleeping and dreaming. So he's right by my foot. So I think immediately we will see a level of competence that goes up in our government, and particularly signal to the rest of the world. We have lost so much stature in our foreign policy, in our outward looking face. We need to build that back up and build. 4 years is too much time to have lost. So I'm deeply, deeply committed to making sure Pennsylvania Terps are deep blue and take nothing for granted. Work hard and reach people and make this argument that you need competent people serving you in government.
Yes. So if someone went to find out more about you or donate to your campaign, where could they do that?
Please go to my website, nina4pa.com. We'll be updating with I haven't even updated with my win yet. So I have to go do that. nina4pa.com. You can go to my Facebook page, Nina Ahmed for Pennsylvania. It's a public page. You can go to Instagram at Nina4PA, or you can go to Twitter. Nina Ahmed PHL is my Twitter handle. And my website has all of the social media listed on there, as well as a donate button to help me win my general election.
What is one thing, in closing, what is one thing you would like everyone to know about you? Why should they vote for you as Pennsylvania's next Auditor General?
I believe deeply that government is there to do public good. And my hashtag for my campaign has been leave no one behind. When you marry do public good with leave no one behind, all Pennsylvanians get seen, heard, and served. And that's what I intend to do with my office. So I hope people will consider voting for me.
Well, thank you for joining us. Good luck with your campaign, and you'll have to join us again.
Thank you so much. There's so much to talk about and get feedback from people to shape the direction of Pennsylvania. And I thank you for doing this valuable service. You're doing a public service, Rogette, by taking time to do this. I know you wear many hats, and you wear all of those hats very competently with a lot of grace. And I think we need role models like you to show that, we can open doors. And what you just did for me is you opened the door for me. So I'm very thankful for that. And I look forward to working with you and Dauphin County and rest of Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you and take care. Be safe.
Yes, thank you very much. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us again tonight. Tonight you heard from Dr. Nina Ahmed, Democratic nominee for Auditor General here in Pennsylvania. If elected on November 3rd, she will break that glass ceiling and become the first person of color elected to a statewide row office in Pennsylvania. I have been involved in politics for over 30 years now. For most of those years, there have rarely been a Black or brown face at the top level of most campaigns I've worked on or the elected officials I worked with. Unfortunately, the higher you go, the less racial diversity you see. The problem is not restricted to campaigns. In Congress, just over 20% of the congressional staff is of color. It's even worse in state legislatures. Black people account for only 9% of all state legislatures. Hispanics account for only 5% of state lawmakers. With these numbers, how can we expect politicians and candidates to be on the right side of racial justice issues, such as criminal justice reform, wage disparities, employment discrimination? You see the problem here too, I'm sure. The lack of diversity among our elected officials and their top aides impairs their ability to understand their diverse districts. If we are more intentional about the way that we ensure diversity in political campaigns, public offices, and the rooms where decisions are made, it will transform the way that political leaders show up during moments of crisis. It is also how we can effect change that is inclusive and meaningful. It's not good enough to show up to a march or protest holding a Black Lives Matter sign when there is no one in your office that looks like me. Having elected officials to set the agenda of different races and nationalities allows a cultural understanding and life experience that is necessary in today's ever-changing world. It's a perspective often lost and not appreciated when the room is accessible to only people with a certain pedigree and connections. Dr. Nina Ahmed is not only educated, but has the managerial experience to be the next Auditor General of Pennsylvania. Don't vote for her just because she is a woman of color. Vote for her because she is qualified and will bring a perspective to the office we have never seen in Pennsylvania, a perspective that is desperately needed. Remember, real change happens at the ballot box through the people we elect to make policy decisions for us. So remember to vote on November 3rd. Again, please subscribe to watch our weekly show on YouTube at Rogette Harris, and feel free to send a comment, show idea, or just say hi at unfinishedbusiness@rogette.com. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. Be safe and join us next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Let's get busy and solve some unfinished business.